Yeah, mate. Got eights, yeah? Yeah, alright, mate. Yeah, let's see a flop, yeah? Yeah. You what? You raise, yeah? Cool, mate. Yeah, cool. You what? You bet? Yeah, cool, mate. You have ace king? You have ace king, yeah? Yeah. You have flushing, mate. You have ace king, yeah? You what? You check? Yeah, bet, mate. Yeah, bet, mate. Yeah? Yeah. You cool? All in. I'm all in. Yeah, got him, boys. Got him. Yeah, at eights, mate. Yeah, at eights, mate. Okay. So there's a little more than meets the eye to a hand like this. It's not just me losing my mind and trying to fight my opponent and getting all combative, although it is that too. But there are three things we really want to look for in an overfolded spot such as this. And if we can identify these three things, then we can basically be gold miners in these spots. These spots are very, very profitable. The first thing to look for when you're trying to identify a spot where bluffing is a gold mine is going to be that your opponent has a mostly capped range. The second thing is that your line is going to instill discomfort to many, many hands in that range. So your line is going to be terror inflicting, discomfort instilling, whatever you want to call it. You can imagine yourself in the opponent's shoes, and you can imagine this plethora of hands that's very upset now. Ace queen, king queen, pocket kings, pocket aces, ace jack, pocket tens. The list goes on. None of these hands are happy here, and for good reason. Lots of discomfort. And the third thing you want to look for when you make a bluff like this is that your story, your range is scary. You have a lot of value hands. It makes a lot of sense. It's easy for villain to see how they can lose here and lose very, very often. Okay, so just to recap, the villain's range is mostly capped. Our line inflicts mass discomfort across their range. And it's believable. They can easily see how they're losing to lots of combos in our range. When those three things are true, humans are going to fold very often. These are the three things I tell my one-to-one students in spots where they're bluffing in more adventurous ways. They're bluffing regs. They're trying to make people fold in big pots. Obviously, there's a type of player this doesn't work against, who's stationary, sticky when the pot gets above a certain size. Don't try and make a recreational fold kings here. It's not a good idea. This hand was played against a reg. Let me get all of my don't try this at home disclaimers out the way before we analyze this fully, and then look at some other hands that I played in this session this morning. So the story begins with pocket eights here. We're in the hijack, and there were a couple of soft spots on this table. This was one, and I believe this was another one, although I could be mistaken. But in any case, when there are recreational players, a hand that's basically indifferent between folding, calling, and 3-betting is usually going to swing positive for calling. Meanwhile, it's not so clear that 3-betting is any better than it was before the presence of these recreational players. If anything, they're going to cold call your 3-bet with 9s, 10s, and jacks, hands that are meant to fold at equilibrium. So that kind of sucks for 3-betting, actually. So I want to say 3-betting gets a little bit worse in this spot. This is a reg that opened, by the way. And I want to say that folding also is just 0 EV, right? So calling becomes positive. Folding and 3-betting are probably 0 EV and negative, respectively, in these spots. So I think you just call here. I think this is the best line. If this is a recreational player, then you can actually just 3-bet, right? 3-bet small and 3-bet pure and hope that regs behind you don't capitalize. But yeah, there's more to this spot than meets the eye pre-flop. Okay, so reg squeezes in the small blind here, and we make the defend. This is very, very close. There's some extra dead money. The squeeze wasn't so big. We're in position, and maybe there's some skill edge. I like to, you know, fuel my own ego wherever I can, because I'm deeply insecure and terrified of everything. So I like to just sort of say, you know, I'm probably better than him, so I'm going to call. That's a good way to protect yourself against the horrors of reality, right? Right, guys? So we see the flop of 9-7 queen with 2 diamonds and villain bets. This is already getting close, right? The 8 with the diamonds, we should remark, is better than the 8s without the diamond, because when the 8 comes, we don't want it to bring a flush, right? Because that's going to kill our action against worse hands. It's going to greatly reduce our implied odds, but it's also just going to mean that we're losing and getting stacked more often. So actually, the quality of your outs when an 8 can bring a flush and when it can't is actually massively different, right? So we call the flop here, and the turn is a jack of clubs. By the way, if you want to do more work on your exploit game, before my brand new course, Weapons of War, comes out on the 1st of November, then check out Cash Injection. In fact, you know what? Use code Snowmen. 8s are called snowmen, by the way, in case you didn't know. Use code snowmen at checkout at Carrot Corner, and I'll give you 25% off cash injection in celebration of Weapons of War dropping soon. There's tons more exploits in that course. Common spots too. Spot's a bit rarer, but it's cool. So the Jack turn comes. Pretty good card for villains range. We are going to have Jacks here, like sometimes. Although I think that's a bit more likely to 3-bet in early position, but we'll have it. Villain will have a Jack a lot here. A lot of their bluffs on the flop are Ace Jack, Jack 10, King Jack, things like this. They'll have Ace Queen, they'll have Kings, they'll have Aces, they'll have King Queen, they'll have Queen 10 suited, they'll have 10s. They'll have a very, very merged range here. So this is definitely the sort of card that blocking makes a lot of sense on. Half-potting makes some sense on. And checking a lot makes sense here too, because villain just has this very merged range. Now, I think the mistake that a lot of people make in this spot is that instead of building a block bet, they would just be really effective here for a lot of those hands. They sort of rear up at the Jack like a horse. Let me do my best horse noise. They kind of go at the Jack. And because of that, no, there was no editing there. That was literally just my horse noise. No, seriously, it was. And because of that, they're going to end up with this capped, overly merged, not slow playing enough, predictable one pair range class. And what we're actually kind of looking for in the river here is, yeah, a diamond's good because I think they're very likely to bet again with Ace 10 of diamonds, Ace King of diamonds, Ace 8 of diamonds. We block that, but you get the point. Ace 5, Ace 4 of diamonds. King 10 of diamonds is a straight. They're very, very likely to bet again with diamonds that don't contain the Jack. If they do have diamonds here, it's going to be Ace Jack of diamonds, King Jack of diamonds. And if they have that, yeah, fair enough. But the other thing to say is that if the river's a brick, they're also going to be left with a ton of Ace Queen, Ace Jack, King Jack type hands. Jack 10, Queen 10, pocket 10s. They have a massive array of call, turn, fold, river hands here naturally. And what Equilibrium's going to do, what GTO's going to do to sort of counteract that, is it's going to be blocking the turn a bunch. It's going to be bluffing the turn a bunch with like ends and some hands like that here. It's going to find some hero calls on the river. It's going to check jam the turn with some of those hands. But actually in real life, I think people are just landing with a very capped range that's extremely easy to fold on the river here to an all-in. So this spot has all of the hallmarks of this sort of gold mine overfolded spot. Firstly, villain's range is definitely mostly capped here. There are some anomalies. There are some times he just has a random slow play or just has a flush like Ace Jack of diamonds, but they're few and far between. Secondly, our line is going to make all of that one pair region, even over pairs, uncomfortable. We are repping something that beats an overpair here, guys. We are repping for value. Pocket 7s, pocket queens, pocket 9s. I might have flatted Queen Spree. Don't judge me like that, I know what you're thinking. Pocket jacks, King 10, flushes. Stuff that beats one pair, right? We're not jamming here with Ace Queen. That would be preposterously thin. Be awful. And so villain has a bluff catcher here with Ace of diamonds, Ace of spades. And you might think he's not folding aces because you want to jump to some massive black and white conclusion and tar this with the thickest generalist brush ever. And so he's not folding aces. But a lot of regs are folding aces here because they understand that they have a bluff catcher in what is a very difficult node to bluff in. Because unless I'm finding 10s, Jack 10, etc. here, I'm really not bluffing. I'm not bluffing at all. Now, is 8s meant to bet the turn? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But when I bet the turn, I'm in full value bluff mode. And I'm stealing this quote, value bluff. I believe Charlie Carroll said this originally, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe he got it from somewhere. I don't know. Value bluff's not something I use that often. Because building the pot to then win it later doesn't work well as like a sole reason for betting unless the fold equity is through the roof. It's a very exploitative notion. Because in GTO, there's no such thing as betting now, knowing you're getting called a lot, to then bluff the river as your sole purpose. You'd need other stuff going on, right? Like a bit of equity or to be a good world for your range or something like that. That alone isn't enough in theory because the investment you put in here and that combined with the investment in the river is just like not that favorable. But when the fold equity is more than it needs to be, and significantly so in spots like this because of the 3 checklist things we went over, building that pot to actually then take it down, like building up the Jenga tower to knock it down and take all the blocks. Weird analogy, I know, but yeah, that's what we're doing here. It makes a lot more sense, actually. So I'm a big fan of this turn bet. I'm not making it to aimlessly give up the river. I'm never giving up the river here. Okay, there's certain cards that suck, like a queen. But I'm really not giving up the river here. And I know that when I bet the turn, but villain doesn't. And so we are embarking on a plan. A course of action across multiple streets, with a set goal in mind exploitatively. I think these spots are printing. Villain tanked here for like 36 seconds. Regular tables, you know. And that was a bit scary, but ultimately I thought he probably just has like an overpair or ace queen or something, and who the hell wants to call that hand in this spot? This is the believability side of things. If you have a queen here, or aces or kings, you do not want to call these spots. I'm bluffing this time. I find this bluff. Okay, great. Good for me. But this is an under-bluffed spot. So Villain's Fold is right, but it's our job to capitalize on the spots where the better regs are going to overfold, and a decent reg at 200 NL is not going to want to call this spot, even with kings or aces. In fact, it's probably better to call here with king-jack than it is to call aces. Because aces is going to block like ace-10 of clubs. If you have the ace of clubs here, you're going to block a bluff. If you have king-jack, you're going to block king-10 suited, and you're going to block jacks. You're going to block more value, right? And less bluffs. So I actually think, like, overpairs are not such a clear call here. Anyway, I could analyze this spot all day. The checklist is the important thing. And if you want more exploits like the exploitative tips, then use that code. Snowmen will get you 25% off cash injection. That's the biggest kind of discount we do outside of Black Friday sale. In fact, that's the same discount you'll get at Black Friday, so there's no point even waiting for Black Friday if you want that specific course. Anyway, I'll stop plugging, guys. On to another hand. So we're now going to look at a spot that is very much the opposite. We have 8-9 here in the big blind, and we face a quick small c-bet on 6-5 deuce monotone. This may well be a spot where people are actually not range betting, and given that they're not range betting, they might be too equity driven here. It could well be that it's actually too easy to check hands like Jack 10 here, and easy to bet equity driven. So, I don't know. You know, in game I thought, let's make the small raise. Doesn't have to work very often. We have the gutter. I think this is fine. I think I overestimated how good it would be exploitatively to raise this flop. I don't hate it though at all. And I wouldn't say that you need a heart in this spot. I think the fold equity is going to be enough here. On the turn, we could blast again here. I think that's very reasonable. We decided to check this time. I think that's also okay. I don't think it's like a completely mandatory, we need to bet with single gut shot kind of node. Especially with no heart. I don't mind checking back. And the river is a 3, and this is a decent card for our range. Like in theory, we do have more 4x here than the small blind with this flop raise. That's a lot of our bluffs are going to be centered around a 4. The ones that aren't just the one heart hands and stuff. And yeah, I think this is a good card. I think we also raise a bit of like weird hybridy stuff like 5-3 and stuff like that. We make some 2-pair here. So we pick up value combos here. We would have bet a lot of our single hearts in the turn, and then we wouldn't be igniting a lot of our single hearts in the river. So I actually think on this node that we have a pretty good theoretical bluff here. It's probably good to bluff this hand in theory. The problem is that if we go to our checklist of the elements of bluffing against humans, is this a mostly capped villain range? Yeah, I think so. Although I wouldn't be shocked in a spot like this to see some flushes. Just thinking that we're kind of polar, we're going to value bet 4x anyway. We're going to value bet a bad flush anyway. And then going for check raise here with a really big hand. I think it's far more likely here than in the line where villain has checked and then called. So as a general maxim, people are going to be less capped a bit when they've taken a line like call your raise, turn check through, and then they check the river. They can go for some traps there. When they've check called the turn though, that's where they're going to be at their most capped, right? Like in the previous hand. So here, element 1 of bluffing versus humans, that they're mostly capped, is kind of true, but it's not as true. These are all gradable notions, by the way, guys. They are not black and white. If you think in terms of black and white in poker, you don't deserve to play the game. You don't. Stop playing the game. Why are you still playing the game? honestly. So yeah, I think that element is less present. The second element, that this is fear instilling, it's discomfort inflicting, that lots of villains' reigns feels like crap here. I don't agree. I think that the way humans perceive this is, okay, they're not thrilled to see the 4 straight. They know that we can have a 4, but they also just see scattered aggression. They see a raise followed by a check. They think that we would have bet most of our flushes on the turn. They're probably right about that, by the way, against population. And so they're going to be more suspicious here. They're going to be a lot more curious. They're going to be a bit sort of like, really? You sure you got that, bro? Rather than, oh no, there's no way you have snowmans here, like in the last hand. So that's less good as well. Second factor is less good. And the third factor, which is how believable our story is, and, you know, how many value hands they can imagine us having. They can imagine us having some, but I think they're also going to discount a lot of our value hands here. So I suspect this is underfolded, this spot. I do. I think it's an underfolded spot. And we decided to check back here, kind of irrespective of what GTO would say about bluffing. And I think one of the things that separates the good bluffers from the bad ones is that the good bluffers are Jamie Gold, 2006 World Series of Poker champion, and the bad bluffers are everyone else. I'm just kidding, but he did say he wanted to be the best bluffer in the world at one point, was what he said on High Stakes Poker. He just bluffed every single time he had the chance to. That's not what it means, Jamie, to be a good bluffer. Being a good bluffer is all about knowing when the elements of bluffing, the 3 elements we've talked about in this video, check out, and when they don't. And in this hand, I think that they don't. I think that they're a lot less present, and so giving up is going to make a lot of sense here. So kind of like the opposite spot. In theory, I don't doubt that our fold equity is reasonable here, but I just think people are skeptical here. I think this is probably the right thing to do to give up. Villain has a set. I think I like the river check because, like, what exactly are they getting value from if they lead here? We've polarized enough on flop that we're not going to be bluff catching subset very often. Subset, that's a word, but you know what I mean. Hand's worse than a set. Like, we're either going to have some slow played flush or 4x that beats them, or we're just going to have nothing. So why on earth would they bet the river? I see people bet the river here with 5. This is a big mistake. This check is very, very good. Very good river check here by Villain with the 5s. Okay, next spot. Here's another spot where bluffing would be misguided. This is something called Crow's Rule from the Carrot Poker School, grade 3. At one point, it was called Judgmental Crow's Rule, and the crow that was depicted in the image had a very judging expression on their face. You know, I was on the Jungle Man podcast, Winning at the Game of Life. I don't know when that episode's dropping. They kind of asked me, like, he asked me a great question. You know that way when an interviewer asks you a question and you're like, I'm so glad he asked this question because I have a phenomenal answer. And it was like, how do you make your content, like, colorful and meaningful? Because humans learn via narratives and stories. It was something to that effect. Don't quote me on that. I'm paraphrasing. And I was like, well, let me tell you about all the theorems in the Carrot Poker School. And yeah, like, I think that's important. Now, Crow's Rule was somewhat arbitrary. I was kind of running out of things to name stuff, but there's a lot of theorems in there, like River Blunder Theorem, Greed Theorem, Glutton Theorem, and I think it just makes learning a lot more meaningful. I think that's a cool point. But anyway, back to the technical stuff. We have 5-3 of hearts here, the old 53, and we call, and the flop is Queen 7 Deuce with 2 hearts. We go for the check raise against this sizing. I think against this sizing, it's less appetizing than against 1/3, because some people in pool are actually just like bet size equals hand strength here. That said, it's clearly like a very high frequency raise. There's a million good turns for us. We unblock the bet fold range, which is like the mediocre cards, and we just like this kind of combo. This is exactly the kind of combo you want to raise here in theory. In practice, it's probably fine, but less good against half than it is against the 3rd, where I think it's just printing. We talk about that a lot in episode 1 of Cash Injection. Jack of Clubs on the turn, $16 on the turn. By Villain, we fold. Now, Crow's Rule is that when you've check raised the flop and 2 things happen next, then you have to give up. And the 2 things are, 1, that you don't improve, and 2, that the texture is bad for your range. When you check raise on Queen 7 Deuce, your bluffs are centered mostly around the 4, the 3, the 6, the 8. These kind of cards, bottom pair, a 7 with a kicker and a backdoor that's a low kick over the backdoor, Jack 10, maybe, stuff like this, like Jack 10 of diamonds. You never make the nuts on a Jack turn. You make some second pair, but most of your range is unhappy. And with absolute air here, we have to give up because we missed after check raising the turn, and the turn isn't good for range. It's a punt theoretically to invest any more money here. And in practice, it's not great either, because if we go through our checklist of the human elements of bluffing,
Villain's range is not capped. They can have queen, jack, jacks, pocket queens, aces, kings, sevens, all the really, really good stuff. We are not going to instill that much fear here because we're just basically saying we have sevens or deuces or queen seven suited if we bomb the turn. And I don't think our line is particularly believable just because it's hard to have a set, right? So if we have a set, it's kind of like lucky us, we have the absolute nuts, even though it's hard to have the nuts. So definitely a mandatory give up spot. Today, we're just really ironing out when we're allowed to bluff and when we're not allowed to bluff. If you bluff here, it's kind of just like flailing barbarism. That's what it is. You're kind of just like, ah! You're all over the place. You're like a monster. And you need to rein yourself in. Because it's not okay to just be an absolute monster. Okay? Good. Glad we got that sorted. Alright, guys. The tennis of hearts. Open. 3-bet from Reg. European Reg. Probably really serious and aggro and headphones. Probably has headphones on at the live table. Hoodie. Like, doesn't really talk to anyone. Scowls at people. Probably just all of those stereotypes, right? Am I right? Call the 3-bet here, and it's Queen Jack 10. Very, very good board for button. Kind of hanging on by a thread here with our backdoor flush draw, gut shot, and third pair. The amount of raise we'll want to play here in a 3-bet pot is minimal because they can have 16 combos of ace king and we don't really have any because it's cut off. If we're under the gun player here, it's a bit less lopsided, but very big nut disadvantage spot with 4-betting queens and jacks pure. Just don't really see why we'd play any raise here, honestly. I think villain just gets to have their cake and eat it and just bet a lot with impunity. 10 comes and we check. We have improved, but I don't think donk bets are viable. I think the nut advantage is still just way in villain's favor. Ace king is just a very powerful hand because not only is it semi-nutted here, but it's also abundant. 16 combinations is no joke, especially in a 3-bet pot where ranges contain less absolute combos. Check, check. Okay. With the mostly capped villain range. We have trips here, right? So we're never bluffing, but just sort of going through these factors. That's got an uncapped villain, though. How believable would it be if we bluffed here? I think pretty believable. Like, what would our air actually be? I don't see a lot of it, right? I mean, we call flop with 9s, I guess, which is now counterfeit. 8s, I think we can just fold on the flop. I don't even know if 9s is even a good flop call. It's probably quite bad, but I mean, for third pot, I guess we call. Apart from 9s, I'm not really seeing any air we can have here. So this looks like a spot where it kind of sucks that villain just has a good hand a lot here. He just has a jack, like a fair bet. Or something like aces or kings. But I think this is a decent bluff spot, actually. Like, I think if we have a bluff, we can just go big here. Not overbet or anything, but we can probably go big and just do really well. I think it's pretty believable that we just have it here. I think this is a fear instilling spot. The lights just flickered. I'm kind of worried by the electricity in this house sometimes. So yeah, we go for this for value, because if we think that big bets work really well as a bluff in this spot, like let's say B66 or B75, then when we're value betting, I think we just need to size down. I think if we bet too big here, we start to get a fold from like king, queen, aces, kings at very high frequency. Ace, king, although I think ace, king bets turn almost always, so it isn't here. And therefore, the right value sizing must be a smaller one, right? That was kind of my thought. Villain did call after a think with king, queen. It's reasonable. I mean, we might be bluffing 9s. They need 20% equity. They know they're usually losing, but they don't need to win very often. I think this is exactly the right sizing with ace 10. I even went for like a smaller block than normal here. Went closer to quarter pot, I guess. Yeah, because I was just kind of... I just felt in my bones that this is a very unappealing spot for your opponent to call down in. So it's a good thing to do, to put yourself in your opponent's shoes, whether you're bluffing or value betting, and ask yourself, how inclined is a reg of this standard going to be to call here? Like, how appetizing is it? Because if you find it appetizing, likely a lot of pool will find it appetizing. If you find it like, oh god, I hate this spot, I just want to fold my range, they're going to feel the same way. And that's what bluffing is all about against thinking players. When you're bluffing against fish, it's much more just about attacking when their range is really weak and backing off when their range gets strong. That's really it in a nutshell. Attacking where they're capped, wide, all of that stuff. Backing down when they've filtered multiple times and nothing's changed in the texture and they look like they've got a crazy stat line. Right, that's how it is against fish. Let's look at one more hand. Then I'm going to go get my hair cut. I'm going to go teach some bridge. I'm going to go to a bridge party. What a life I live, man. It's so exciting. You guys might think that you have an exciting life with your high stakes poker that you play in your social lives and being younger than me and going out and having a good time. But let me tell you, there's nothing more exciting than getting a haircut than going to a bridge party. You get red wine at the party, you get buffet food, catering, and sometimes old people fall off their chairs while shouting because it's the one night a year where they get to do that. It's sort of socially acceptable. So yeah, you're not going to beat my social life, I'm afraid. Anyway, last hand. Let's do it. This sort of spot is covered in full in Weapons of War. God, has my table not been centered this whole time? God, how embarrassing. And I talked about this extensively, and I think it's one of the episodes around the middle of the course. I forget exactly which number of episode it is. But it's about building the check raise game and the probe game on the turn. And it's about understanding that this was a weaker player, by the way. This is probably just foldable against a good player. Depends on the rake, but this is foldable. Against a weaker player, you just shouldn't fold because too many good things can happen in it to win it. And when it goes check, check here and the turn comes a king, the idea in theory is that you're getting smashed range versus range. So you just check a lot, and if you do lead, you build it around the very best stuff possible. Like pocket 8s, pocket 7s, 8-7, king 7, deuces, etc. And then you lead 2.5x pots. So the sizings we talk about in Weapons of War in this spot are basically B250. And then like we talk about the block size and the B75 and when you want to use them. But the big bet that I'd recommend is 250 to 300% pot here. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because villain has a monopoly on hands like ace king, king queen, king jack, etc. You know, maybe even some overpair if they're properly checking back the flop. This fish won't be, but in general they will. And then if you are value betting, you're just value betting huge, and otherwise you're checking because the spot sucks for your range. That's the nuts and bolts. So in this spot, I like check raise, and the reason I prefer check raise to just leading B250 is I want to give the villain a chance to define what they have. Because we know that recreational players are very bet size equals hand strength driven. And if they have ace king aces here, king queen, king 8 suited, they're usually going to bomb it. And if they have something like ace queen, they're usually going to bet smaller. And I really, really like just check raising here against a small bet. So we do, and our sizing's huge because, well, I think in practice I can go smaller than this actually because they don't have enough hands that are elastic here. They either have a king or a flush draw or something really bad. So it's actually a mistake against a recreational player. I'm too in the theory trenches here. But the reason this works well in theory is that you're again repping a value region of 2-pair plus. So why would you want to undercook this? Why would you want to make this $12? You wouldn't, right? You want to make this huge. They fold. There's nothing much to say. I just wanted to show you this as a taster for what's to come in Weapons of War. Don't forget the code Snowmen, 25% off the Little Brother course cash injection, which is obviously out now and it's been out for a while. But if you've not watched that yet, definitely recommend adding to your exploited repertoire with that course. And I will see you back here on YouTube for more. Let me know what you think about this format. I hope the 3 bluffing pointers are going to remain in your head. Remember, mostly cap villain range, discomfort inflicting across lots of their range, and it's very believable that you have a lot of value combos. When those 3 things are true, you're probably dealing with one of these absolutely printing money, overfolded spots against regs. Take the spot. Doesn't have to work every time. You know, if you never get called, you never feel the burn of a big bluff not working, then you're not bluffing enough. You got to feel that burn sometimes. But yeah, get the red line up. Let's get bluffing more. CarrotCorner.com for everything else from me and from Carrot Corner people. And I'll see you back here for more soon. Run good, and bye for now.